approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH9 completing the sales comparison approach. PG14 prior sales. Notes print. Leave a comment. Prior sales. Below the comments field on the URAR form, you will be asked to document how many times the subject and comparables have sold in the past years. It is required by a SPAF that we analyze prior sales on the subject property for the prior 3 years. A SPAF does not require a sales history of the comparable sales, but when completing the URAR for lending purposes, the form requires a 1-year sale history of each comparable sale. Please note that it is for 1 year prior to the date of sale of the comparable, not 1 year prior to the effective date of the appraisal. Some lenders may want a 3-year sales history on the comparable sales also. This is something you could undertake as a contractual agreement with your client. The most important reason to report and analyze a prior sale of the subject is that it may be an indication of the subject's value. If it isn't an indication of current value, it then becomes imperative that the appraiser know and explain why not. Values can go up or down, and the subject property can change over 3 years. It may have been poorly maintained or heavily renovated. All of these factors need to be considered and explained if there is a recent prior sale within the last 3 years. Then, there is a large field on the form which has 5.5 lines in which you are expected to analyze any prior sales of the subject or comparables, if applicable. End of page. Chapter start. 55%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH9 completing the sales comparison approach. PG15 prior sales reporting URAR. Notes print. Leave a comment. Prior sales reporting URAR. When reporting prior sales or transfers of the subject and comparables, the UAD specifies a required format for you. Date of prior sale/transfer. The appraiser must report the dates of prior sales or transfers of the subject property for the 3 years prior to the effective date of the appraisal. The appraiser must report the dates of the prior sales or transfers of any comparable property during the 12 months prior to its date of sale. If more than one prior transfer of the subject property or any of the comparable sales occurred within the applicable time period, the additional transfers must be listed and reported in analysis of prior sale or transfer history of the subject property and comparable sales field. Reporting format. Date of prior sale/transfer, MM/DD/YYYY. Price of prior sale/transfer. The appraiser must report the prices of prior sales or transfers of the subject property for the 3 years prior to the effective date of the appraisal. The appraiser must report the prices of the prior sales or transfers of any comparable property during the 12 months prior to its date of sale. If more than one prior transfer of the subject property or any of the comparable sales occurred within the applicable time period, the additional transfers must be listed and reported in analysis of prior sale or transfer history of the subject property and comparable sales field. In some jurisdictions, the price of prior sales or transfers is not disclosed in the public records or otherwise available to the appraiser within the normal course of business. In such cases, an appraiser may leave this field blank and make a comment in the analysis of prior sale or transfer history of the subject property and comparable sales field or elsewhere in the report that the price of the sale or transfer is not available. Non-monetary entries such as unknown, unavailable, etc. are not permitted in this field. Reporting format. Price of prior sale/transfer, currency, include $, whole dollars only. End of page. Chapter start. 55%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH9 completing the sales comparison approach. PG16 HUD guidance on flipping. Notes print. Leave a comment. HUD guidance on flipping. Another reason to analyze any prior sales is to try to become aware of any unethical property flipping. This is defined as property flipping is a practice whereby recently acquired property is resold for a considerable profit with an artificially inflated value, often abetted by a lender's collusion with the appraiser. HUD has developed a rule to stop flipping of properties using FHA-insured loans. For real estate investors, the rule makes it more difficult to resell properties at a profit that have been purchased at below market prices and fixed up for resale at a market price. The HUD anti-flipping rules can be summarized as follows. Sale by owner of record. Only the owner of record may sell a home to an individual who will obtain FHA mortgage insurance for the loan. It may not involve any sale or assignment of the sales contract, a procedure that often occurred, according to HUD, when the homebuyer was a victim of predatory practices. Time limitations. A property cannot be resold within 90 days of its acquisition and be eligible for FHA financing. A property that is resold after 91 to 180 days is eligible for FHA financing, provided that the lender obtains an additional appraisal from an independent appraiser based on a resale percentage threshold established by FHA. For property that is resold after 90 days to 1 year, the lender must obtain additional documentation to support the value to address circumstances or locations where HUD identifies property flipping as a problem. Note that these restrictions apply only to FHA loans. End of page. Chapter start. 55%.
As you review the data you entered into the sales comparison grid, ask yourself 3 questions. Do I have a sufficient quantity of comparables to justify a value conclusion? With unusual properties, it's not uncommon to need 6 or more. Is my data of reliable quality? Does it reflect standardization of measurements and reputable sources of data? Is each comparable appropriate? Has an arm's length sale occurred on the open market? Presumably, you will now have at least 3 indications of value. Let's suppose they range from $150,000 to $160,000. We don't just add the 3 numbers together and divide by 3. That is, we do not use the average of the indications. That doesn't mean that in this case you can never arrive at a final value of $155,000. Applying a simple arithmetic mean is not the correct procedure here. Anybody could add up the 3 numbers and divide by 3. We were contracted to perform a professional service in which we import our own professional expertise, experience, and reasoning. Also, if we were to just average the results, it implies that all 3 comparable sales are equally meaningful and pertinent. That is usually not the case.
Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH9 completing the sales comparison approach. PG18 reconciliation and summary of sales comparison approach. Notes print. Leave a comment. Reconciliation and summary of sales comparison approach. As part of the reconciliation, we need to go back and reanalyze all of the comparable sales. We need to identify which are the strongest sales and the weakest sales. One way to rank the sales is to look at the amount of adjustments that were necessary. A perfect comparable would require no adjustments. A weak comparable would require many significant adjustments. One method of comparison is to look at the amount of net and gross adjustments for each comparable. Because the prices may vary, the net and gross adjustments are expressed in in terms of percentages, which equalize the differences. Remember what we said previously, though, that net adjustments can be deceiving. The gross adjustments will tell the story of the real magnitude of the adjustments needed to equalize a comparable with the subject property. Another measure is the number of adjustments made to each comparable. Every adjustment represents a significant difference between the comparable and the subject property. The more adjustments are needed, the less comparable the properties are. That may be a general rule, however, we need to look more closely. A comparable that requires only 2 adjustments, but they are large, subjective adjustments that are not well supported may be less reliable than a comparable with 4 small, well supported adjustments. End of page. Chapter start. 55%. 55%.
A lot of what is done in the reconciliation process is more intuitive than mathematical. There's no substitute for experience and knowledge of a particular market area. We may have 2 comparables that adjust to virtually the same price. However, you might just have a feeling about one of them that something funny happened in that transaction, but you just can't pin it down. You may have even done extra research and verification of the details, but it just doesn't feel right. You lack confidence in the result. You may want to discard such a sale if you have the luxury of an adequate quantity of other reliable sales. Usually, we weight the comparable sales according to our belief in their strength and validity. This may be a subconscious process in which we believe the 2 best adjusted sale price properties are on the high end of our range of values, and therefore we will finalize the value opinion on or near the top end of the value range. Some appraisers go to the extent of a formal quantified weighting process, where they might assign, for example, 50% of the weight to comparable 1, 30% to comparable 2, and 20% to comparable 3. It is possible under USPAP to produce a final opinion of value as a range of numbers, such as 190,000 to 195,000. However, in most appraisals for lending purposes, the client desires a single point estimate. In the very last part of the approach, we have to make that final commitment and state our opinion of the indicated value by a sales comparison approach.
Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH9 completing the sales comparison approach. PG20 addenda. Notes print. Leave a comment. Addenda. The addenda, plural of addendum, is a collection of attachments at the end of an appraisal where you put all the supporting materials used to come to your value conclusion. These might include contracts, covenant documents, homeowner association documents, deeds, surveys, title reports, floor plans drawn to scale, leases, location maps showing the subject and comparables, neighborhood plans, photos, plat maps. Make sure that any addenda items look professional and are organized in a logical manner. End of page. Chapter start. 55%.